Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce my dear friend, Stefanie Pruegel. So Stefanie's garden and her fully electrified home in San Leandro have been on the garden tour multiple times. I love Stefanie's garden for many reasons. First, it's so beautiful. It's just a pleasure to be in. Next, I've been visiting her garden since shortly after it was installed, and Stefanie makes designing, installing, and maintaining a native garden seem doable. And finally, it's wonderful to hear the birds in it and see the insects in it when I go to visit. I hope you enjoy Stefanie's garden as much as I do. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So exciting to be here. I'm excited to share my native garden story and how I was able to turn basically an area of land that was lost to nature, you see here on the left, into a wildlife haven. And I want to say, if you plant it, they will come. And it's really true. It's amazing to me that over the few years that I've been gardening with native, I have really been able to bring these wonderful insects and birds into my garden with native plants. And it's so transformative. It has changed my life, and I think it's super inspiring. And I think you guys are all here because you know that's true and that's what you want to do. So here we are in March 2016. This is my house in San Leandro. It's a fairly large yard, 6,000 square feet, with a small house on it, and it's all weedy lawn back in 2016. There were a few non-native shrubs, and the first thing I did was sheet mulch. As we're all familiar, that's the top method. You do that first, get rid of your lawn. And the very first plant I put in was a coast live oak. And at the time, I didn't actually know Doug, and I wasn't aware that oaks are such powerhouses among the Keystone plants. So very exciting that that was one of my first plants. And here, just a year and a half later, the transformation is really amazing. It does look like a garden now. And my baby oak, although it looks nothing like a tree yet, has really grown and filled in. I'm going to show you a few of the plants that I did have in that second year. That was California poppy, a low-growing ground cover sage, bee's bliss. There's coyote bush, that's a ground cover. That's also on the Keystone species list. And the cheerful woolly sunflower. Another year later, the seaside daisy had almost tripled in size, and the deer grass, a native bunch grass, started flowering and really looking like a bunch grass, and with all the woolly sunflowers in between. I also sheet mulched my side strips, or hell strips as they're known. They looked really hellish before. They were like, we have these weird rolled curbs in San Leandro, so it was like cars parking on them, and all muddy and rutted out. So I've sheet mulched, and I came to really appreciate boulders in landscaping. They're not only beautiful and make your yard really look more like you're on a hike or, more natural, but they're very functional, and clearly there's no more parking there. Instead, I have, again, the bee's bliss salvia. It's like tough as nails. It's really good for side strips. It's low-growing, and it's in between the boulders that you now can barely see here anymore. On the other side of the sidewalk, I have coast buckwheat, and these were just a few 1-gallon plants, and they very quickly created this thick carpet. And that was great because I had a lot of weeds at first, but the coast buckwheat, in addition to my very disciplined pulling weeds, really crowded it out. And I have to say, the coast buckwheat and any buckwheat, Keystone species, I think it's over 50 moths and butterflies that it can host, and it's one of my favorite plants. That's because it blooms kind of starting in June, so it's when all the other wildflowers are fading. It's super drought tolerant and has a long bloom time and attracts just so many pollinators as well as a host plant. So one of the many is this beautiful buckeye that I managed to take a picture of. And so there's hoverflies, there's many of these insects that Kathy so nicely captured with her super lens. I don't have that many great photographs of insects, but I know that this is a host plant because I've also seen in my yard the Acmon blue little butterfly, and that butterfly's caterpillars eat buckwheat. So I'm pretty sure that this one grew up on one of my buckwheats. And actually, when I was kind of trimming the border to the sidewalk, I noticed a lot of those equivalent of chrysalis under the buckwheat. So it's really true, when you leave the leaf litter, there's an abundance of moth and butterflies just waiting for the next season. So this is 5 years after planting, and this is sort of the side yard. Every single plant is like taller than me. That's not that hard to do, but it really looks like a colorful forest with the flannel bush and a bunch of manzanitas here, the Dr. Hurd. I really like that cultivar. There's a not ground cover, but regular coyote bush here, mountain mahogany that just has a very nice habit, tall and sort of light. It's right in front of my windows, but still lets a lot of light in. And one of my favorites is the Ceanothus frosty blue. This one grows pretty tall. I want to say it's at least 12 feet tall. Also one of the powerhouses on the Keystone species list. And I want to play you a little video. I don't think we have sound, but you can... hear that buzzing? That's like the buzz pollination. And notice the hummingbird that just dashed in for a moment. But so cool, the bumblebees, they vibrate their bodies to just get more pollen out of the flowers. And to be able to kind of witness that up close was so cool. And this honeybee gracefully sat still for a little bit so I could take this picture and check out the big load of pollen she has. So now back to my baby oak that was looking really awkward. So I have this super cool drone video that just shows you how tall the oak has gotten. You get a little bit of the bird perspective towering over the house. We were actually documenting my solar roof, but some of the footage was also really cool just for the plants. And I just imagine what it looks like when the birds sort of land in the oak, which is too high up for me to see, but I know there's a lot of them in there. You can also see it from the inside of the tree. Like, this is now 5.5 years old, and the diameter of the tree is like 9 or 10 inches. Really amazing to me. And I think it's important not to lollipop your trees too early, because they really need those bottom branches to strengthen the tree. This one is now way bigger than the house, and it's always full of birds. And so, speaking of birds, so I started out, and this is literally before I planted natives, what I saw. I was like the non-native collared dove, and then the house sparrow. Neither one of these are native to California or even the US. And dramatic change. And this is not my photos, but only just a handful of the many birds I've been seeing. I'm a little embarrassed to say that when I started out, I kind of knew scrub jays and hummingbirds, not a lot of the other ones. I didn't even know what a chickadee looked like. But now, just observing them, I can even recognize the song, or I see how they behave, like the bush tits. They never show up alone. They're always in a big flock. Or ground foraging, when you look at the, oh wait, here's some names. The California towhee, always on the ground. But super extra exciting are the migratory birds. And sort of starting about 4 years ago, I started to see these guys coming in, and every fall, reliably, the hermit thrush and the golden and white-crowned sparrows. And I still don't know a lot about migration, but I felt like I was kind of in on the travel schedule, and they just felt like old friends coming by every year. And I'm proud to say that the Townsend's warbler, Kathy also had a picture of that. That is out of my window with a regular camera, and just such a cool bird kind of coming through. I encourage you, if you have a bird bath, put it near where you can see it. So I have a fountain that I use as a bird bath, and it's right by my window. And this is also where I, for the first time, saw a hooded oriole here and snapped a rather fuzzy picture. But it felt amazing, really made my day, because it's so tropical looking, right? And then got even better when a little later, right outside my window, I have this Chaparral clematis growing right outside, and this is a juvenile oriole that sat there just long enough for me to take a picture. So taking you back to the sad days of dead lawn, this is the backyard. So this is what it looked like before sheet mulching, now sheet mulched. And I'm just showing you this because I feel like it can be really overwhelming when you start this. I was kind of petrified, what am I going to plant here? How am I going to structure this? And I think what I learned is that it's really helpful to think about different rooms and where you want to be. Like, for example, I always knew I wanted a patio right by the house so I can really use the garden as my outdoor living room, have friends out there. Maybe around the patio is where I would maybe keep the plants a little more neat. Maybe I would deadhead them a little more. But then toward the back of the yard, that's where I really was going to keep it wild and not really do much and leave all the dead flowers. And I have a flagstone path connecting those two. So in 2018, again, fairly early on, the view into my garden, and you see here this awkward, scraggly little blue elderberry, but just 2.5 years later, it actually had fruit, and they grow pretty fast, very, very sort of instant gratification plant, and then pretty much immediately, I got birds, and not just the house finch, but that is probably my best customer on the elderberry. Another view into the yard right around that time, I have showy penstemons, really spectacular looking, wild, very drought tolerant. And I really love the deer grass. It just looks so dramatic when you have sort of the light fall on the spikes. And the sagebrush in the background, really great background plant. And you may remember that is also a Keystone one. Another favorite of mine is the California sunflower. Another really tough, quick-growing one, blooms a lot. I see a lot of pollinators on here, like this very cool orange sulfur butterfly. But this is also proof of how well Keystone plants or native plants work, because I do find these moth caterpillars on it. Here's a geometer moth. And they're very small. You learn how to find them. I first thought, oh, there's these birds, they must come for something, but I couldn't really find the caterpillars. So another quick glimpse of what I said earlier about having a space for yourself where you really enjoy being and have like a bush anemone, looks beautiful in May. There's foothill penstemon right by the patio. And then here's the flagstone path I mentioned earlier, goes back into my wilderness, and I made sure I have a little spot for myself back there also so I can watch what's going on. I'm often back there and pretending to work. Not very productive, as you might imagine, because there's so much going on. So I have the Cleveland sage. This is like in June, July, just smells so delicious. And right next to me was able to capture this western tiger swallowtail and a yellow-faced bumblebee on the flower right next to me. And like Doug said, they're so busy doing their thing. I have never felt like I had to worry about any insect biting me or whatnot. I have a corner with logs and branches, kind of a brush pile I'm working on, and I bury it halfway in the soil so the wood starts decaying, because I know a lot of critters eat that, and again, that's food for birds, right? So it's part of the ecosystem. But what I didn't expect were these really cool slender salamanders that now are nesting under the big log. And here in the shrubbery, it's almost hard to see, is a little ruby-crowned kinglet. And ruby-crowned, it's really hard to see the ruby crown. Here's a close-up. You see those few feathers? This is actually a photo Kathy took in my yard, and there's a funny story how that photo happened, but ask me in the break, I'll tell you. Along the fence line, I have chaparral mallow, because it's a nice screen. And I noticed walking up close to it, you see these tiny holes. They certainly don't take away from the look of the plant, not to worry about that. But there are the moths. Here are the little moth caterpillars. And they are sort of the bulk of the baby bird food, I would say. And they're not spectacular, but they're really the backbone of all this. And another sort of garden mystery, California aster. There should be a name floating in, but it doesn't. So let's go to the bee plant that also has little bites taken out, and these are really exact and round. And it is the western leafcutter bee that does that. This is not my photo, but isn't that fascinating? The leafcutter bee takes these pieces of leaves and puts them in the nest to line it and make it nice for the brood. I hope one of those nests is happening in my logs I have there in the corner. Just so many fascinating insects I did not know about, like the sweat bees. Check this out. It's like a little jewel right there on the gum plant. This is a bee. I did not know this until fairly recently. And I want to leave you with one more story of just awe in my yard. This happened just a few weeks ago, and I was sitting in the backyard, and this is sort of a dry creek I made, sort of a rain garden, and I saw sort of a cloud of sparkles emerging from the ground. And I went up a little closer to see what was going on. And I found these winged termites, and they were sort of leaving the colony to find mates. And they're actually quite beautiful. They have these silvery wings that just sort of glisten in the sun. And I know you're thinking, oh, bad news, termites. But hear the story. So I was hardly figuring out what was happening here with that these were termites. And within a minute, 5 or 6 dragonflies showed up overhead. And they literally came out of nowhere. They're big guys. And they're making like these mad dashes, and they're just like snatching up these termites. And you may know that dragonflies actually can direct each of their wings separately, and they can fly backwards. So they're really good predators. So bad news for the termites. But if that wasn't enough, I'm looking over, and out of my bushes comes this California thrasher. This is not my photo, but it really looks like that with that curved bill. And I had seen him visit my yard over the past few weeks, and he was just having a field day here. Usually he digs around, really has to do some work getting stuff out of the ground and forage, but here he was just like picking off these termites that hadn't quite taken off yet or landed nearby, and he certainly didn't have to worry about his meal that day. So I just felt like it was such a neat glimpse into the web of life, and this is really what kind of happens on day to day. So it has been such a rewarding journey for me and inspiring, hopefully, to you. I look forward to the lunchtime talk. I have so much information I'd be happy to share about what I did, what worked, what didn't work, how I picked plants. But first and foremost, I wanted to show you what's happened and the rewarding part. Thank you. So Kathy's saying we have some time, and we could do some questions right here if you want. Go ahead.
Yeah, it looks great. I was just curious what the irrigation and watering schedule looks like.
Yeah, very good. So he's asking about irrigation and watering schedule. So you saw in that one picture from the backyard, I had some drip irrigation laid out, and I did do that for the first, I want to say, 2 years to establish plants, but I also put in a big rainwater catchment system. I have 3 each 1,000-gallon rainwater tanks, and so I stopped using the irrigation because I have my own water that lasts me throughout one season usually. I mean, you have to have a fair amount of space to put these tanks, right? But it's also preferable because a lot of the plants, like say the manzanitas, the coyote bush, definitely the oak, like there's a lot of plants you don't want to water anymore when they're established. Like the flannel bush would die if you did. So a drip system that has a certain routine at that point isn't even that great. So I do a lot of hand watering with my own water, which is more work. But I want to be out there anyway, so I don't really mind that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
If the leaves of a plant are being used to line a leaf cutter cocoon, is that then considered a host plant like any other?
I don't think so. I mean, Doug would probably be the person to answer that.
Where are you, Pleasure? So, did you hear the question?
Yeah, a host plant is referred to something that the larva eats, and I don't think we should use it.
Yeah, I think it's about feeding, like literally a caterpillar would eat the plant. But it's certainly one of those many uses, and it just goes to show how it's a system, you know, like there's a lot of interconnectedness happening in the yard.
I can't see the hands, but yeah, go ahead.
So I wanted to ask you about the oak. You started it when it was very, very young, and in 5 years it was quite large. Did you find that the ecosystem around it had changed considerably when it grew to the height it did? Because you had planted a lot of perennials that need sun, and then the oak took over, so the garden had to.
Right.
So it was not a super tiny plant. It was like a 24-inch box. It was about maybe 5-6 feet tall when I planted it. But yes, it's gotten so big, and I'm convinced that it is because all that soil with all the mulch and not removing the leaves is just really fertile, and it had a great base to grow on. In terms of the plants around it, right now, I had some big boulders underneath. I didn't plant those. Remember the woolly sunflowers and some of those seaside daisies? They're still not in the shade of the oak tree. But I do think once the oak gets bigger, I will switch to, I was already thinking about maybe hummingbird sage or something that's more shade tolerant. So what you're speaking to also is just the change. I started gardening and I'm like, oh, this is like an outdoor living room. I'm just going to furnish it and then that's it, right? And that's just not the case. Things just constantly change. And you're like, oh, this plant maybe didn't do so well, or now it's shaded out, now something else would thrive. And there's just so much life. And I've gotten over finding that frustrating, and now I just find it fascinating. One more? One more question, go ahead.
I also was curious about the oak and its growth. How did you water it? So you've got the nutritious soil, but how did you water it when it was young? And how have you changed the water now that it's a little older?
Yeah. So definitely young plants, no matter how drought tolerant, they need water first 1 or 2 years. So drip system out there for the first couple of years that I then stopped using. And for, I want to say, starting year 3, no more water. Because oaks, when they're, adults, they don't really want extra water. So I only go around other plants, maybe annuals or something I recently planted because something got shaded out. And so that's a consideration actually now that I'm putting in shade plants under the oak. I'm not sure that's going to work. Can I water them in the summer? I sort of open mind. But it seems really resilient. I think it's going to be all fine.
All right, could you join me in thanking